and Jack the Ripper. The name itself is a story. It brings up images of foggy London streets, gaslights, and a man in a top hat and cloak carrying a black bag. We all have this picture in our heads. It's been burned into our culture by 100 years of books, movies, and documentaries. The killer of at least 5 women in Whitechapel in 1888 was a man. A monster, a phantom, but always a man. But what if that picture is wrong? What if we've been looking for the wrong person for over a century? What if the killer wasn't a Jack at all, but a Jill? The idea seems strange at first. A female serial killer in Victorian England, it goes against everything we think we know. The brutality of the crimes, the sheer physical violence seems to point directly to a man. And yet, the more you look at the facts of the case, the more this unconventional theory starts to make a strange kind of sense. It answers questions that the traditional theories can't. It fills in gaps that have puzzled investigators for generations. So let's put aside the image of the man in the top hat. Let's explore the possibility that the most famous serial killer in history was a woman. To understand why this theory even exists, we have to go back to the streets of Whitechapel in 1888. This was not the London of fine carriages and gentlemen. This was the East End, a place of extreme poverty, overcrowding, and desperation. Life was cheap. For many women, selling their bodies was the only way to earn enough money for a meal or a bed for the night in a filthy lodging house. The victims of the Ripper were all part of this world. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. They were poor, often drunk, and lived on the fringes of society. They were vulnerable. And that's a key part of this puzzle. The killer needed to get close to these women. Close enough to kill them quickly and quietly in dark alleys and courtyards. A man approaching a prostitute on the street has a clear, understood purpose. It wouldn't necessarily raise alarm bells for the woman, but it might for anyone watching. A well-dressed man in a poor area or a rough-looking man could draw attention. Now, imagine a woman approaching one of these victims. What would that look like? It would look like nothing. 2 women talking on a street corner was normal. A woman helping another who was drunk was common. A woman wouldn't have to explain her presence. She wouldn't seem like a threat. She could put an arm around a victim, lead her into a dark corner, and no one would look twice. She had the perfect camouflage. She was invisible. This is the first, and perhaps strongest, point in favor of a female killer. She had access that a man might not have had. She could get close without raising a single suspicion. Then there's the nature of the crimes themselves. They were horrifically violent. The victims' throats were cut, and their bodies were mutilated. The killer clearly had a lot of rage. But one thing is missing. In almost all the cases, there was no evidence of sexual assault in the way we typically understand it. The attacks were focused on mutilation, on removing organs, not on rape. This is a strange detail for a male serial killer. While not all male killers rape their victims, a sexual motive is often central to their crimes. The violence itself is often the sexual component. With the Ripper, the violence seems different. It feels more personal, more hateful. The mutilations were targeted. In several cases, the uterus was removed and taken. Why the uterus? To a male killer, it could be a trophy, a symbol of his power over women. But to a female killer, it could mean something else entirely. It could be a symbol of a deep-seated rage against her own sex, or against the very thing that made women women. Perhaps the killer was a woman who couldn't have children and hated those who could. Perhaps she was a botched abortionist taking revenge on the women she saw as immoral. The motive shifts from sexual sadism to something more like psychological fury or jealousy. This brings us to another major piece of the Hill the Ripper theory, the idea of the midwife. In Victorian London, midwives were a common sight. They worked at all hours, day and night. Their job was messy. They were often covered in blood. A woman walking through the streets of Whitechapel late at night, her clothes stained with blood, wouldn't necessarily cause a panic. If stopped by a constable, she could simply say she'd just come from a difficult birth. It was the perfect alibi. Think about Catherine Eddowes. She was killed in Mitre Square, a place that was patrolled by police every 15 minutes. The killer had a tiny window of time to commit the murder and the mutilations. It had to be done fast. And when the police found her body, the killer was long gone. How did they escape without being seen? A man running from the scene, possibly with blood on him, would have been noticed. But a woman walking briskly, perhaps carrying a bag, she might just look like a midwife heading home after a long night's work. And what about the killer's skill? The press at the time was full of stories that the Ripper had to be a doctor or a surgeon because of the precise way the organs were removed. This fueled the idea of an educated upper-class man, but a midwife would also have anatomical knowledge. She would know her way around the female body. She might not have the formal training of a surgeon, but through experience she would know exactly where to cut to remove a uterus. The surgical skill argument doesn't just point to a doctor, it could just as easily point to a midwife. There's also the question of the evidence left behind. At the scene of Annie Chapman's murder, a few items were found near her body: a piece of an envelope, a small comb, and a piece of muslin. They seem to be the contents of her pocket, but some have suggested these items were arranged deliberately, almost ritually. It's a small detail, but it could be seen as a feminine touch, something a male killer might not think to do. And what about witnesses? There are very few reliable ones. But there is one account that is particularly interesting. A man named George Hutchinson gave a very detailed statement to the police. He claimed he saw Mary Jane Kelly, the last victim, with a man on the night she was killed. He described the man in great detail: his hat, his coat, his mustache. His statement has been the basis for many theories about a male ripper. But Hutchinson's statement is almost too detailed. He remembered the color of the man's eyelashes and the type of pin in his scarf, all seen from a distance on a poorly lit street. Many investigators now believe Hutchinson was either lying or embellishing his story to get attention. There is another, less famous witness. A woman named Elizabeth Long claimed she saw Annie Chapman talking to a man shortly before she was killed. She described him as looking shabby genteel. This description is vague. It could fit a man, of course. But it could also fit a woman dressed in men's clothes, or a woman whose appearance was just generally androgynous. The key is that we have no clear, undisputed sighting of the killer. The figure remains a shadow, and a shadow can take any shape. So, if the killer could have been a woman, do we have any suspects? Oh, we do. The most famous one is a woman named Mary Pearcey. Mary Pearcey's story doesn't happen in 1888. It happens 2 years later, in 1890, but the parallels to the Ripper murders are chilling. Pearcey was having an affair with a man named Frank Hogg. She became obsessed with him and deeply jealous of his wife, Phoebe. One day, Phoebe Hogg and her baby daughter visited Mary Pearcey at her home. They were never seen alive again. Later that day, Phoebe's body was found on a heap of rubbish in Hampstead. Her throat had been cut so violently that her head was almost severed from her body. She also had deep wounds on her abdomen. The baby was found later, smothered, on another street. When police went to Mary Pearcey's house, they found a scene of carnage. The walls and floor of her kitchen were splattered with blood. They found a carving knife and a fireplace poker, both bloody. Witnesses reported seeing Pearcey pushing a baby carriage with high sides through the streets that day. The carriage was later found, also covered in blood. It seems she had used it to transport the body. Pearcey was arrested, tried, and eventually hanged for the murders. But the connection to the Ripper case was made almost immediately. Sir Melville Macnaghten, a high-ranking officer at Scotland Yard, even considered her a Ripper suspect in his private notes. The sheer ferocity of the attack on Phoebe Hogg was reminiscent of the Whitechapel murders. The focus on the throat and the abdomen, the dumping of the body in a public place. Could Mary Pearcey even deal the Ripper? The timing is a little off. The Ripper murders stopped in 1888. But it's possible the killer just went dormant for a couple of years. The psychological profile also fits. She was a woman capable of extreme, explosive violence, driven by jealousy and rage. Her crime showed a cold-blooded planning and a shocking level of brutality. She was strong enough and ruthless enough to do it. While there's no direct evidence linking her to the 1888 murders, she remains the most compelling suspect for a female Ripper. Another suspect put forward is a woman named Lizzie Williams. This theory is tied to one of the most prominent male suspects, Sir John Williams, a respected surgeon who had a clinic in Whitechapel. The theory goes that Lizzie was his wife. She discovered that her husband was having an affair with one of the victims, possibly Mary Jane Kelly. More importantly, Lizzie Williams was unable to have children. The story goes that in a fit of jealous rage against the fertile women her husband was seeing, she committed the murders. The removal of the uterus from the victims takes on a powerful symbolic meaning in this context. It was the one thing Lizzie couldn't have, so she took it from others. The evidence for this is thin. It's based on a few circumstantial clues. A shawl, supposedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes, was passed down through Sir John Williams' family. It was recently tested for DNA, with inconclusive results. Proponents of this theory suggest Lizzie was the killer and her powerful husband helped cover it up. It's a compelling story, full of passion and betrayal, but it remains just that, a story with little hard evidence to back it up. So we have a theory that seems plausible. It explains the killer's ability to get close to the victims. It offers a different motive that fits the strange nature of the mutilation. It provides a perfect disguise in the form of a midwife, and we even have a couple of potential suspects. But we have to be honest, there are also major problems with the Jill the Ripper theory. The biggest one is physical strength. The murders were not just stabbings. They were brutal, powerful attacks. Throats were cut down to the spine. Organs were carved out in minutes. Could a woman, even a strong one, have overpowered another woman, held her down, and performed these acts so quickly and efficiently? The victims were not passive. They would have fought back. It would have been a struggle. It's not impossible for a woman to do this, but it would require a significant amount of strength and aggression, which most people then and now associate with a man. Then, there's the simple fact that no one at the time seriously considered the killer was a woman. The police, the press, and the public were all convinced they were hunting a man. This shaped the entire investigation. Witnesses were asked about men they saw. Theories were built around male motives and male professions. If the killer was a woman, she was hiding in plain sight, protected by the assumptions of a patriarchal society that couldn't even conceive of a female monster. This institutional blindness could be part of the reason she was never caught. But it also means there's no official record, no police report, no witness statement that points directly to a woman. The theory is built by reading between the lines and questioning the official narrative. We also have the famous From Hell letter. This was a letter sent to the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, George Lusk. It came with a small box containing half of a human kidney. The letter claimed the kidney was from one of the victims and that the writer had fried and eaten the other half. The tone of the letter is coarse, boastful, and semi-literate. It reads like it was written by a man. I send you half the kidney. I took from one woman, preserved it for you, t'other piece. I fried and ate, it was very nice. Many experts believe this is the one piece of correspondence that most likely came from the actual killer. If it is genuine, it damages the Jill the Ripper theory. The voice in the letter is masculine. Of course, a woman could be faking a male persona, but the letter feels raw and authentic in its ugliness. So, where does that leave us? Is it possible Jack the Ripper was a woman? The answer is yes. It's possible. The theory isn't just a wild fantasy. It's based on a careful reading of the case's strange and contradictory facts. It explains some of the most puzzling aspects of the murders in a way that traditional theories do not. The ease of access, the lack of sexual assault, the specific targeting of the uterus, and the ability to disappear from a crime scene without a trace. All these things make more sense if the killer was a woman disguised as a midwife. But it's not a closed case. The arguments against it are also strong. The physical strength required for the crimes and the universally held belief at the time that the killer was a man are major hurdles. In the end, we are left with no definite answers, only questions. The Ripper case has never been about certainty. It's a mystery built on shadows and whispers. We have very few hard facts. Most of what we know is speculation, built up over more than a century of obsession. We project our own fears and assumptions onto the killer. For 100 years, that projection was male. We imagined a monstrous man, part demon, part gentleman. The Jill the Ripper theory forces us to question that projection. It asks us to consider that the monster might not have looked like a monster at all. She might have looked like a neighbor, a midwife, a sad, angry woman walking home. The horror of the Ripper is not just what was done, but the fact that the killer melted back into the city, never to be seen again. They became just another face in the crowd, and that face could just as easily have been female as male. We will probably never know the truth. The identity of the Whitechapel killer is likely lost to history forever. But the possibility of Jill the Ripper remains. It's a compelling, disturbing thought. It reminds us that our assumptions can blind us, and that the truth is often stranger and more complex than the stories we tell ourselves. The figure in the fog, the ghost of Whitechapel, might not be who we think it is. And that uncertainty is the most haunting part of the entire legend.